The unpredictable variable. The grand citadel of Emperor Zordon VII hung suspended in the void between the twin stars of the Helios system, its crystalline spires refracting starlight into 1,000,000,000,000 prismatic patterns. Inside this marvel of engineering, the Galactic Court convened for their weekly grievance session. Today's agenda contained one item that had generated more formal complaints than the Great Taxation Reform and the Mandatory Cultural Appreciation Initiative combined: the Emperor's new bodyguard. This appointment violates 17 different security protocols. First Minister Klozak sputtered, his gill sacks flaring with indignation, not to mention 5 millennia of tradition. The Emperor, a being of light and energy contained within an ornate exosuit of precious metals and rare minerals, regarded the assembly with what passed for amusement in his species. His voice, modulated through quantum harmonizers, carried a hint of mischief that made the court even more nervous. Protocols exist to be improved upon, Emperor Zordon stated, and tradition without purpose is merely stagnation with ceremony attached. The human stays. As if summoned by the Emperor's pronouncement, the subject of their debate entered the chamber. The collective gasp that greeted the human's arrival would have depressurized a lesser chamber. Commander Alexandra Chen walked with the relaxed confidence of someone completely unaware of, or perhaps unconcerned with, the 17 different species currently cataloging her every movement for later dissection by their respective security analysts. She was not particularly tall or physically imposing by galactic standards. What made her presence so unsettling was the casual way she moved, the unpredictable patterns of her attention, and the complete absence of any obvious weaponry. The court's security experts had spent weeks trying to identify what made humans so inherently disturbing to watch. They eventually settled on the term evolutionary unpredictability, a polite way of saying humans didn't move or think like any sensible species should. "Report, Commander," the Emperor instructed. "All systems normal. Your luminance," Chen replied, using the informal honorific that had scandalized the court the first dozen times she'd used it. "Though your Minister of Resource Allocation is skimming funds from the Orphaned World's Rehabilitation Project, I've compiled the evidence for your review." Minister Vextral's tentacles went rigid, and the room temperature dropped several degrees, partly from the atmospheric control system responding to the sudden increase in metabolic heat from the assembled courtiers, and partly from the cold fear that swept through the gathering. "That is a serious accusation," First Minister Klozak said, his voice somewhere between outrage and terror. "Based on what evidence?" "Our financial systems are monitored by quantum AI with perfect loyalty programming." Chen shrugged, a human gesture that the court had learned indicated anything from apathy to impending violence. "Perfect loyalty to whoever programmed them last. I noticed the discrepancies in the subsistence allocation reports. The numbers were beautiful, too beautiful. Nature isn't that neat, so I checked the distribution terminals on Halcyon IV personally during my last leave." "You left the Emperor unprotected." Klozak was practically vibrating with righteous horror. "I assigned temporary security I personally vetted," Chen replied. "And more importantly, I confirmed that the orphaned refugees on Halcyon IV are receiving exactly 63% of their allocated resources. The rest vanishes somewhere between the quantum ledger and reality." The Emperor's exosuit hummed as he processed this information. "Minister Vextral, you will surrender yourself to investigation immediately." What followed was the kind of chaotic procedural argument that bureaucracies across the universe have perfected: who had authority to investigate, which protocols applied, which committee should oversee the committee that would form to discuss the formation of an investigative task force. Throughout it all, Chen stood beside the Emperor, apparently relaxed but with eyes that never stopped moving. The court feared her not for her weapons or her strength, but for what she represented: unpredictability in a system that had functioned through perfect predictability for millennia. The court had good reason to fear humans. Their homeworld, a place called Earth, had been discovered only 30 standard cycles ago. Initial scans had classified it as a death world: high gravity, extreme climate variations, lethal radiation levels, aggressive biodiversity, and worst of all, conflict-driven evolutionary development. Humans had evolved not through cooperation with their environment, but through constantly battling it and each other. Most species in the galaxy had evolved toward specialization and ecological harmony. Humans had evolved to adapt, improvise, and overcome any challenge through sheer stubborn determination, while the galactic community had spent millennia perfecting their civilizations through careful iteration. Humans had crashed through their development in wild, chaotic leaps, burning through resources and ideas with terrifying speed. The first contact scenario had been a diplomatic catastrophe that still caused diplomatic corps trainees to freeze in horror during simulations. Humanity had responded to the arrival of an advanced civilization, not with appropriate awe or deference, but with suspicious caution followed almost immediately by enthusiastic curiosity. They asked questions no properly evolved species would consider about weapons capabilities, shield frequencies, propulsion systems, and whether various galactic representatives would be interested in grabbing a beer to discuss trade deals. Within a decade, humans had spread throughout the galaxy, inserting themselves into every economic and cultural system with alarming ease. They made excellent traders, explorers, and mercenaries, roles that required comfort with chaos and uncertainty. Their capacity for adaptation made them uniquely valuable in crisis situations, which explained, but did not excuse, in the court's opinion, why Emperor Zorvan had appointed Commander Chen as his personal bodyguard after the Velkaran assassination attempt 3 cycles ago. The meeting is adjourned. The Emperor, announced as Minister Vextrol, was escorted away by the ceremonial guards. "Commander Chen, walk with me." The court dispersed in clusters of furious whispers. Chen fell into step beside the Emperor's hovering exosuit as they moved toward the private observation deck. "You've upset them again," the Emperor noted once they were alone. "That's practically in my job description at this point," Chen replied. Section 12, Paragraph 8. Disrupt complacency wherever discovered. I don't recall including that in your appointment documents. I added it myself. Seemed in keeping with the spirit of the position. The Emperor's exosuit emitted the harmonic pattern that Chen had learned was laughter. "You understand why I chose you, don't you, Commander? Because I saved your life at the Velkaran summit when your entire security detail was compromised. That was merely confirmation of what I already suspected about humans. Your species sees patterns differently. You expect betrayal, anticipate chaos, and most importantly, you thrive in it." Chen glanced out at the stars. "On Earth, we have a saying. The only constant is change. Your empire has been stable for so long that it's forgotten how to adapt. That makes it vulnerable." "Precisely. And that is why the court fears you, Commander. Not because you are dangerous, though you certainly are, but because you represent a fundamental challenge to their worldview. You are the embodiment of the change they fear. And you, your luminance. I have ruled for 700 years. Without change, even immortality becomes a prison. You humans are many things, but you are never boring." The conversation was interrupted by a security alert. Chen's implants flashed information directly into her visual cortex. A disturbance in the South Quadrant residential zone, where visiting dignitaries were housed. "Stay here," Chen ordered, already moving toward the exit. "That's not the protocol," the Emperor observed with amusement. "Protocol would have you moved to the secure bunker with a full escort, broadcasting your location to anyone with the right scanning equipment." Chen called over her shoulder. "Stay here, in the last place anyone would expect, with the automated defenses I personally modified. I'll handle this." The Emperor watched her go, his energy patterns shifting in what might have been concern. Not for himself, but for what was about to happen to whoever had triggered that alert. The disturbance turned out to be a test, or at least that's what it became after Chen intercepted the infiltration team 3 levels below where they intended to be. The 5-member strike force was composed of Shroud Walkers, a species of near-perfect chameleons whose ability to blend with surroundings made them the galaxy's premier assassins. They would have been invisible to standard security systems. They would have bypassed predictable patrol patterns and automated defenses. They were completely unprepared for a human who didn't follow protocols and who had, in her first week as Imperial Bodyguard, reconfigured the environmental systems to detect subtle changes in air displacement. Chen didn't fight fair. She didn't announce her presence or issue formal challenges as ceremonial guards would have. Instead, she adjusted the gravity in the corridor to 1.5 times Earth standard, comfortable for her, debilitating for the lighter-boned shroud walkers. Then she threw in 3 flashbang grenades modified to target the specific visual spectrum shroud walkers used. The resulting combat was brief, one-sided, and completely devoid of proper military procedure. Chen fought with a combination of martial arts from a dozen Earth cultures, improvised weapons, and sheer unpredictability. When the palace security finally arrived, following proper protocols and response times, they found Chen zip-tying the last unconscious assailant with emergency repair cables she'd ripped from a wall panel. "Your timing is impeccable," she told the shocked security chief. "If you'd arrived any earlier, you might have had to actually do something." The incident report filed that day ran to 347 pages, with 42 separate citations of protocol violations, improper weapons usage, unauthorized environmental system modifications, and, most seriously, failure to comply with proper chain of command notification procedures. Chen's own report was 6 words long. Threat neutralized. Equipment needs replacing. Sorry. The court was officially outraged. Unofficially, they were terrified. Not because a human had defeated 5 elite assassins. That was concerning but not surprising given what they knew of humanity's combat capabilities. They were terrified because she had anticipated the attack through means they couldn't understand, countered it with methods they couldn't predict, and succeeded using approaches they couldn't replicate. In the perfect, orderly system of imperial security, Commander Alexandra Chen was the unpredictable variable. And in mathematics as in security, unpredictable variables were the most dangerous element of any equation, the calculated risk. The Grand Celestial Banquet was held once every 3 standard years, bringing together representatives from all corners of the galaxy. It was a showcase of imperial power, a diplomatic necessity, and a security nightmare. 10,000 guests from 500 species, each with their own dietary requirements, cultural taboos, and potential grievances. Security Chief Dravkor had spent 6 months planning the protection details. His comprehensive strategy included 347 armed guards, 124 specialized security drones, 56 different scanning checkpoints, and 1 very problematic human. "Absolutely not," Chen said, reviewing his plans 3 days before the event. "This is exactly what they'll expect." Dravkor's exoskeleton creaked as he struggled to maintain composure. "Commander, these protocols have been refined over centuries. They represent the collective security wisdom of the galaxy's finest minds. They represent a predictable response that any halfway decent strategist could anticipate and counter," Chen replied. She gestured to the holographic display. "Look at these patrol patterns. They're so regular you could set a clock by them. And these security checkpoints. They create bottlenecks that become targets themselves. What would you suggest?" Dravkor asked, with the weary tone of someone who already regretted asking. "Chaos. Controlled chaos." What followed was the most stressful 3 days of Dravkor's lengthy career. Chen dismantled his careful plans and rebuilt them with a randomized element that defied institutional logic. Guard rotations would follow no discernible pattern. Security checkpoints would appear and disappear at irregular intervals. The Emperor's movements would be known only to a select few, with misinformation deliberately spread among the staff. "This violates every security principle in the manual," Dravkor protested. "Exactly," Chen agreed. "Which means it also violates every assumption a potential attacker would make based on that same manual." On the night of the banquet, the grand hall of the Citadel gleamed with the light of 1,000 stars, captured and contained in quantum chandeliers. Species from across the galaxy mingled in a carefully choreographed dance of diplomacy. The Emperor moved among them, his exosuit adorned with ceremonial embellishments that made him the brightest point in a room full of light. Chen shadowed him, dressed not in armor or uniform, but in formal attire that allowed maximum mobility. She carried no visible weapons, though the court had long since learned that this meant nothing. Humans, it seemed, could weaponize practically anything, from eating utensils to decorative plants to, in one memorable incident, a ceremonial fountain. "You seem tense, Commander," the Emperor observed as they moved between clusters of dignitaries. "3 assassination plots already foiled at the perimeter," Chen replied quietly. "Someone really wants you dead tonight." "Only 3? I'm almost disappointed. Usually these functions generate at least 5 serious attempts." "The night is young, Your Luminance." They approached the delegation from the Arcturus Collective, a relatively new addition to the galactic community. The Arcturians were insectoid beings with complex social hierarchies and a reputation for aggressive expansion. Recent diplomatic tensions over border disputes had made them the focus of particular attention. "Emperor Zorvan." The Arcturian Prime Speaker chittered, its mandibles clicking in the formal greeting pattern. "Your hospitality honors the collective. The presence of the collective enriches the Empire." The Emperor responded with perfect diplomatic courtesy. Chen stood slightly behind the Emperor, her eyes constantly moving, cataloging minute details that the court's security forces might miss. The subtle positioning of Arcturian honor guards, the slight differences in carapace coloration among what should be identical caste members, the almost imperceptible delay in the Prime Speaker's mandible clicks. Something was wrong. The Prime Speaker launched into a prepared speech about cooperation and mutual prosperity. Chen tuned out the words, focusing instead on patterns. The Arcturian guards were shifting positions, creating what looked like random movements, but which were actually opening lines of sight to the Emperor. Chen didn't wait for confirmation. She didn't call for backup or issue warnings. As the Prime Speaker reached the climax of his speech, she moved, not toward the speaker, as any security analysis would have predicted, but toward the seemingly decorative insectoid attendant to his left. Her movement coincided precisely with the attendant's hand reaching for what appeared to be a ceremonial object, but which Chen recognized as a molecular disruptor disguised as a cultural artifact. What happened next became the subject of debate, analysis, and nightmares throughout the court for years to come. Chen executed a maneuver that security footage later revealed to be physically impossible, according to the known laws of biomechanics. She simultaneously disabled 3 Arcturian guards, intercepted the disruptor, and positioned herself between the weapon and the Emperor. The molecular disruptor discharged, catching Chen directly in the chest. Such weapons were designed to break down matter at the molecular level, causing instant disintegration. They were prohibited in all civilized systems and thought to be universally fatal. The court guards responded with commendable speed, neutralizing the Arcturian assassination team within seconds. But all eyes were on Commander Chen, who should have been reduced to component atoms. Instead, she was still standing. Her formal attire was disintegrating, revealing what appeared to be standard human skin beneath, except it wasn't. Where the disruptor had hit, her skin rippled with an oily iridescence, absorbing and dispersing the weapon's energy. "Nanomaterial countermeasures," Chen explained to the shocked onlookers, her voice tight with pain but steady. "Experimental Earth technology. Not 100% effective, but better than the alternative." The Emperor, rather than retreating to safety as protocols demanded, moved closer to Chen. "You anticipated this specific attack." "I anticipated some attack," she corrected. The specific method was a calculated guess based on Arcturian technological capabilities and their access to black market weapons. Speaking of which, she turned toward the security team that had surrounded them. "Check the Prime Speaker's neural implants. This wasn't a rogue operation. The aftermath was chaotic by court standards, but remarkably orderly by human ones. The Arcturian delegation was detained, the banquet continued with heightened security, and Commander Chen refused medical attention until the Emperor was safely escorted to his private chambers. Only then, in the privacy of the Emperor's sanctuary, did Chen allow herself to show the effects of absorbing a molecular disruptor blast. She collapsed into a chair, her breathing labored. The nanomaterial countermeasures neutralized most of the damage, she explained as the Emperor's medical drone scanned her. But there's still significant cellular disruption. Nothing permanent. For a human, you are a terrible liar, the Emperor observed. That weapon should have killed you instantly. Chen managed a pained smile. Like I said, experimental technology. But also, she hesitated. Also, humans are more durable than your scientists believe. Our cellular structure has certain properties that we've kept to ourselves. The Emperor's energy patterns shifted in what might have been surprise. You've been concealing information from the galactic scientific community. Not concealing, just not volunteering everything at once. Survival instinct. She winced as the medical drone administered a regeneration catalyst. We learned early in our history that revealing all your capabilities at once is rarely strategically sound. Yet you revealed this capability to save me. That's my job. It is more than that, I think. The Emperor's voice modulated to a lower, more private frequency. The court fears you, Commander Chen. They fear all humans, but they don't understand you. Few non-humans do, Chen admitted. We're contradictory by nature. Aggressive but protective. Individualistic but community-minded. Capable of both great violence and great compassion. And loyalty, the Emperor added. A concept my court understands only as allegiance to tradition and protocol, not as the personal commitment you have demonstrated. Chen was silent for a moment, allowing the regeneration catalyst to work. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. Your empire is at a crossroads, your luminance. The old ways, predictability, stability, perfect order. They worked in a simpler galaxy, but the borders are expanding. New species like humans are joining the community. Threats are evolving. And you believe humanity's approach is the answer. Not exactly. But I think some human adaptability wouldn't hurt. The court is terrified of me because I represent unpredictability in their perfectly ordered world. But life itself is unpredictable. The universe is chaotic. Trying to impose perfect order is like trying to stop a tide with a rulebook. The Emperor's exosuit hummed as he processed this. There is wisdom in what you say. Perhaps that is why I chose you, not despite the court's objections, but because of them. You force change simply by existing in a system resistant to it. That's either a great compliment or a terrifying responsibility, Chen said with a weak laugh. It is both, the Emperor replied. As are most important things in this universe. The medical drones completed their work, and Chen stood carefully, testing her recovered strength. The court will demand a full report on tonight's events. Let them demand. I will require changes to our security protocols going forward. Your controlled chaos approach has proven its merit. They'll resist. Of course they will. Change is frightening, especially to those who have benefited from things remaining the same. But as you humans say, adaptation is survival. Chen raised an eyebrow. Been studying human philosophy, your luminance. I find your species' writings fascinating. So brief, yet so insightful. The perspective of beings who evolved knowing their time was limited. That's our secret, Chen said with a smile. When you know you don't have forever, you don't waste time on unnecessary complications. You focus on what matters. And what matters to humans, Commander Chen? Living. Not just existing. Really living. Taking risks. Making connections. Leaving something better than we found it. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new harmonics, something like respect blended with affection. I begin to understand why the court fears you, Commander, and why I trust you. It is not despite your humanity, but because of it. The next day, the court convened for an emergency session to address the security breach at the banquet. They expected to finally have the evidence needed to remove the dangerous human variable from their carefully balanced equation. Instead, they were met with an imperial decree. Security protocols were to be completely overhauled under Commander Chen's direction. Traditional practices would be evaluated for effectiveness, not just historic value. And most shocking of all, a new program would begin immediately to incorporate human security consultants throughout the imperial infrastructure. The court's reaction was predictable: horror, outrage, formal protests. But as they looked at the human standing calmly beside the Emperor's throne, the human who had absorbed a weapon designed to disintegrate matter, the human who had anticipated an attack their perfect systems had missed, the human whose unpredictability had saved the Empire, they began to understand a fundamental truth that humanity had learned through its violent evolution on a death world called Earth. The universe does not reward perfect order. It rewards those who can adapt to chaos. And in that moment, the court's fear transformed into something new. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of respect. For in a galaxy of perfect order, sometimes the most valuable asset is the unpredictable variable, the calculated risk, the human factor. The Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, had understood this all along. That was why the Galactic Emperor trusted only a human bodyguard, and why it terrified his court.